everyone. Welcome back to another edition of the RTI Speed Chips by Bob and Chad. Had a great weekend this weekend. Got to do a little pavement or watch a few pavement races actually at Hawkeye Downs. It was a lot of fun. We had some pretty good. Jake McBurney won the show at Marshalltown. And Jimmy Guston won at Boone. And of course, then our own BHE Braden Richards won the sport mods there at Boone. So we had a pretty good weekend this weekend. Of course, we're right fresh off the Harris Clash, which, boy, thank you, Chet. Nice T-shirts. And if anybody wants one of these T-shirts, we still have some T-shirts for sale. And excellent T-shirt this year. Great new design, something different than what we've done before. So it turned out really well. But Harris Clash went well. Man, if you missed it, I think you can still watch it on Imca TV. But it was a great show. Both winners started back in the pack. So, it wasn't a front row start this year, so that was pretty cool. Exciting races. Tom Berry pretty much put the show on for the modifieds. But Ethan Dotson drove from 16th to 2nd. So, it was a pretty racy racetrack, and those guys at Deer Creek did another awesome job. And I just can't say enough about it. Weather was great. It was a little warm during the day, but as soon as the sun went down, the weather was good. So I appreciate you, Chad, for helping us out. Everything you do for the Clash, that's always something that's very important to me, and it's very important to the racers. And it was just an awesome event.
Yeah, it was definitely a good night. I was surprised about the T-shirts having a trophy on there, so we got to make the trophies again, and debuted our new factory support trailer. That went pretty smooth. So we're trying to get geared up for the September specials here, end of the year, Super Nationals and all the big races, and getting things ready to go. So that was a real good tune-up for that. Got vacations and stuff coming up here, and then we'll be ready to go for the busy September month, and can't wait for Super Nationals. I can't believe we're talking about it already.
Yeah, it's 4 weeks away, and well, actually a little less than 4 weeks away. We're excited about that. We're getting ready to get the show car. Is actually at the powder coater right now, getting ready to get powder coated. We're going to have an IMCA sport mod again this year. A brand new white body on it. So looking forward to that. I always look forward to the Super Nationals. A lot of work goes into that deal that people don't think about. It's a lot of work for the racers, but it's a lot of work for the vendors. But it's a lot of fun because you get to see so many people, and you get to talk to so many people, and it's just a cool event, long event, cool event.
We're getting ready to debut a bunch of new products. We're going to try and release as many new products as we can there. As we used to do that at PRI. Now we focus on Super Nationals because there's so many people there, and so we're in thrash mode, trying to get a lot of new stuff done for Super Nationals. And today actually we released we did our cap keeper for the drive shafts, and then today we released a new price cut. We had a plastic injection mold made for them, so that basically cut the cost in half, made right up the road here in Galesville, Wisconsin. So that took the price from $30 3D printed to $15. So we were excited about that. Anything we can do to help manufacturing and make the products less expensive is what we're trying to do. So excited about that. But we got a lot of cool stuff in the works.
Sure, you bet. Well, we already got quite a few questions going on here.
How about that maintenance thing we talked about beforehand? Bump that quick.
Yeah, we took on a scale job for a stock car today, and when we're scaling the car, we always pull the left rear axle out so that the chassis doesn't have any bind. we couldn't get the axle out. And the customer didn't know that it had ever been hit or anything like that. And finally, when we took the drive flange off, I mean, the axle was clear offset in the housing itself. And so that's something that I can't stress enough the fact that, man, you got to check these housings because it doesn't take much of a bend. I've seen them to the point where they'll wad up a rear wheel and not bend the housing. And I've seen them to the point where they barely bent the wheel and bent the housing quite a bit. That's something that, the customer of this car said, well, they hadn't raced it that much this year, but for some reason, it just wasn't as good as it was last year during the Super Nationals. And of course, I'm like, well, you were in one, I mean, you did crash it in the Super Nationals. Well, evidently, you must have crashed it enough that it bent the axle tube. And if we wouldn't have been scaling it, or if they wouldn't have changed gears, they never caught it because they didn't measure it or anything. And it was a quarter of an inch off. So big handling aspect, that was something too. You'd mentioned something about a maintenance tip too. You were talking to a customer today.
Yeah, guy called and the car wouldn't get into the corner. It was lazy, and I asked if he was, had the brake on the cage or if he was on a brake floater and if he was trail braking and using the brake to try and help get the car up. And he said, well, that used to work a couple weeks ago. I'm like, well, what do you mean a couple weeks ago? He said, well, it just doesn't seem to be as effective. I said, well, when was the last time you worked on the brake pads or the rotor? I don't know. So that, the pads were probably so glazed over or maybe even
Sure.
when that stuff gets overlooked, that's, it's maintenance is the key.
Well, and there's so many things to maintain, and I know that people have got, a limited amount of time to do things, but that's where, we preach this in the schools. You have checklists, have maintenance checklists, do certain things every so many nights, and, make yourself these lists so you don't miss those little things. Because, 2 nights of racing, that pay decent, that can be kind of an expensive deal, not knowing when they quit working, so to speak, but whatever. Okay, Dan, I need to increase side wood lower. I need to increase side wood lowering J-bar on the pinion a quarter of an inch. It is about 3/16 above the drive shaft or moving the rear end to the left of the modified. Well, on a USRA mod, if I'm not mistaken, you can actually use wheel spacers. So you could actually tune the car with, different size wheel spacers, but moving the rear end is not a bad idea. That's a little bit more of a corner. If you change the J-bar, that kind of affects all 3 aspects of the corner. If you move the rear end, it seems to just mostly affect it on corner entry. I mean, it'll affect it, the apex a little bit, phase 2 of the corner, but when I'm saying moving the rear end to the left, 1/8 of an inch, a quarter of an inch is a big change. Yeah, Larry, Dustin, we got plenty of shirts left, so no problem. We can get you in some shirts. Larry wants to know what the benefit of locking the brake floater.
I assume you're talking about locking it to the cage on a 4-link
Yes.
suspension. So when you're transferring the brake force through the brake floater arm, that's hooked up forward. When you clamp it to the cage, you're not only going through the 4-link rods, but you're also attached to the cage, which is attached to the slider and spring in the back. So when you hit the brakes, it actually transfers through both of those members. Has a little more leverage when it's hooked up on the cage, so it's a little bit more effective. Gets the car on the right front harder and faster. I would say it's a short track deal. Sometimes you get into a big momentum, like a big sweeping half mile. If you're on the brakes real hard, you can get it on the right front too hard, and then it'll just be an overpowering push, basically. So it's definitely a huge difference from the brake floater arm. You need to really retrain yourself on how you brake, but you can really use it in traffic to turn under a guy. It helps to set the nose when you're behind somebody and get underneath them. So just a little more effective than the brake floater arm.
Taylor wants to know, hey Chad, thanks for the gift card in my pay at the DeFrance Memorial. We'll be calling you soon to order parts.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Love giving back. That's one thing that we try to do here is give back to the customers, and just I really love the DeFrance family, icons of the sport there in Iowa. So love being a part of that race.
Jason, I bought a 17 GRT square tube car, converting it to a B mod. What bolt-ons do I need? Well, it kind of depends, as far as you're going to need all of the rears brackets like what we use on our sport mod. The frame, you're going to need to weld a J-bar. It won't have the panhard bar mount in it. Now, when you say you're converting it to a B mod, does that mean a USRA B mod or a Wasota B mod? Because of course, then you'll be able to use the existing J-bar mount that's in the car. If you're converting it to a sport mod, you'll have to put the J-bar mount, a panhard bar mount behind the housing. But otherwise, a lot of the chassis stuff you already have, and you'll be able to reuse. It's just the bolt-on components on the rear end, the two trailing arm brackets, and then of course you're going to have to, with the quick change, if you're using a quick change, you already got the top brackets, so you'll be good there, and you already got the pinion mount, so you'll be good there. Other than the parts that go on the rear end itself, the rest of the stuff you should already have. Like I said, if it's a B mod or if it's a Wasota B mod or USRA B mod. Sean, how do you guys feel about running left rear preload spring? 3-link Hoffman car, currently running 100-pound, 16-inch preloaded 2 inches. Right rear is a 225, 14-inch. Left front's 500. Right front's a 550. That 100-pound spring with the preload in it's good. It might actually be a little soft. We've actually found that 16-inch spring works good, but we've got some guys that have kind of went back away from the 100-pound on the 3-link stuff, up to like 150 pounds. Still preloading at probably an inch, but that's something to think about. But the 200-pound spring preload wise, 2 inches is about where you're going to need to be on that. So that's pretty good. The rest of the springs sound good. We don't run. It kind of depends on where you're racing. Sometimes we run a little softer right front spring than that, but once again, with the tire that you're running in that situation is probably, I'm assuming you're running a B mod or USRA type B mod. If you're running an IMCA car, we're actually running a pair of 500s across the front. That seems to work pretty good too, especially with that combination. We've actually found sometimes with that preload in that left rear, it frees the carb a little bit much getting into the corner. So we've actually found we've had to up and actually swap those front spring rates to the point where we run 550 on the left front, help keep the car tight getting in, and that 500 helps the car get over on the right front and maximizes that preload that you've got in that left rear. Kevin McFarland. Well, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Um, some of the guys there, it was pretty neat to be inducted with Steve Carlson. When I was helping Brett Moffitt as a driver development, we chased that guy. I swear to God, week after week after week after week, and so that was pretty cool. Can you explain when you would want to put a stiffer right rear spring in and what effect it has on the car? Well, when you go stiffer, it gets you a little more side bite on the right rear. It makes the car a little tighter getting into the corner. Sometimes it can pick up and actually makes the car a little bit freer in the middle to the point where you pick up lap time or time to the point where if you lose a little coming off, you don't notice it because you're going so much faster when you come up off the corner. I've not, we've seen all kinds of crazy stiff right rear stuff. We still, I've tried the 300 pounders, we've tried 250s. We're still running a 225 right rear. That seems to be, in my opinion, that seems to give the car good balance with a 100-pound left rear spring. On an AMOD, that works pretty good. But it does seem like if we go softer than the 225, it makes the car lazy, kind of falls over on the right rear and just kind of lays there. And you'll feel it in the middle of the corner. The car just feels lazy. It just doesn't want to get up and get hustling. So that's kind of my opinion. Doug, Sport Mod locking side bite going into the corner. Has good drive from the center off to catch the car. Currently 13-inch left rear spring and 11-inch right rear spring. Would a 13-inch right rear spring help? Well, that's a great question. In my opinion, I like a 13-inch right rear. I've never been a big fan of that 11-inch spring. Sometimes I think you have to go so stiff there that it creates kind of a spring stiffness in the car to the point where it can be a little bit free. Just adjust your panhard bar a little bit more, put a little bit more angle in the panhard bar. Maybe you might need to shuffle some weight just a little bit to the right of the car on the right rear. Something good to think about too. But I like the 13-inch spring. And you're running a left 13-inch with a sport mod. That's a good combination. That's what we run all the time. Like I said, our normal setup is a 175 left rear and 225 right rear. Hi, Joey. Thanks for getting back together. We appreciate it. We've had a great time, and
I see
Bobby
you
wanted to know he could have used that tool today. I don't know what that tool is, but he could have used some tool today. Oh yeah, that's right. He could have used that today. So he was taking the drive shaft out because he got the pleasure of dismembering a 9-inch Ford Deer so he could take the rear end out of this thing to go get it straightened.
I see Joey got Schrader to victory lane. Good work.
Yeah, good job, Joey. That's awesome. Glad that old man's still hustling it. Yeah, that's pretty good. Yeah, tell that old guy, he doesn't need to stay hidden from everybody. I mean, of course, I guess you've got him racing quite a bit, so he's probably pretty busy.
We were at lunch and they were showing a vintage NASCAR race. It was the Red Baron car, I think, the number 90.
Oh, sure, the 90 car.
They're at Richmond.
Yep. Yeah, actually, that's when I first met Kenny. Was when he came to Davenport to run the Red Baron car, the local late model show. God, and this was 25, 30 years ago. I don't even remember when. It was a long time ago. Brian, BMOD on 3-link, what would a bent bar on the left rear do handling bite as opposed to a straight bar? Which is better? The bar's not actually going. There's really going to be no advantage one way or the other than clearance.
Yeah, any suspension component doesn't know the shape of it. It only knows where the 2 points are. So J bar can be an S, it can be a Q, it can be a J, and trailing arms can be a J, they can be an S, they can be whatever they want to be. It only knows where the two heim joints are. So it's all a clearance deal.
Pat, maybe Bob and Chad and other people should produce maintenance checklists. Well,
Bob and I are working on that right now, ain't we, Bob?
yeah, we've been working on that. And that actually is going to be a pretty cool deal when that's all done.
Shooting for Super Nationals.
Is that going to be Super Nationals too? Awesome. Awesome. Otherwise, if you come to the RTI school, it comes with your binder, or if you buy the DVDs, it's in the binder, and it's a fairly extensive list. In fact, we actually have 2 different lists. And one of the things, like I said, that that's really important is the fact that like that brake deal that you talked about. That needs to be so many nights. You just need to pull the brakes off, scuff them up. It needs to be a deal where went and got myself a brand new 6 horsepower Mercury motor for my little boat today. And that guy in the process, when he's telling me all this stuff about this deal, he's going through this checklist and all these maintenance things that I got to do. And I'm thinking, damn, you're pretty good. I like this checklist thing. Now, how many nights? And he said, well, after so many hours. And I'm thinking, well, how am I going to know how many hours? Well, I guess I'll just have to figure that out. Because there's no odometer or whatever you call them things. There's nothing like that on that little motor. Ryan, I've been seeing some of the top running modifieds around my house area switching to lift arms. And I've also been seeing some left rear coilovers behind. Can you talk about both? What changes would be? 4-link modifier, WSOTA modified. Well, the lift arm, in my opinion, has more drivability to it, because what it does is it's technically supposed to lift weight from the front to the back and transfer that way, where like a torque arm or a spring bar or whatever, pull bar, it transfers the weight more from the back of the car down on the tires. The lift arm is a little bit of a situation where on some stop and go racetracks, now with your WSOTA tire, you've got a little bit better tire and you've got a pretty decent sized blade. If you take the blade and the tires off of there, then the lift arm's not near as good of a deal. It works really well on momentum racetracks, fast, high-speed type racetracks. I think that works pretty well on those situations. The left rear coilover behind, I could see where that would work really good with the lift bar, because with the lift bar, your braking device is up in the center of the car. So when you get off the throttle, the torque or the lift arm actually pulls down on the car. So it actually lets the car pull itself down to suck the car down into the dirt. Where with a pull bar, it kind of teeters it up and tries to jack the car up on the front, which ends up being kind of loose. Well, we've got to have, with the torque link, we've got to have the shock almost in front to gain control of corner entry, where you've got control of corner entry. And then with the downside to the torque arm being short on traction, putting that spring behind the housing along with the shock, there's a lot of traction gained there. Like I said, the disadvantage to the spring behind the housing is the car can get a little unstable getting in. However, That's not the case with a torque arm because your braking device is up in the center of the car. Oh, Jason, that was a Wasota car. I was kind of thinking that might be the case. Austin, is there any advantage to running a +1 axle to -1 or a 16th centered standard? Depends on what you're running as far as I'm guessing that this is probably a modified. What you're doing is you're moving the rear end more to the left by doing your +1, -1, which in turn moves the upper link more to the left. I can't say there's a huge advantage. I think on some of the stock car type stuff and some of the sport mod stuff, I think there's maybe more of an advantage to doing that rather than on an open modified, because of course with an open modified, you're capable of moving everything pretty easily. One thing that does help depends on your motor location. If your motor is setting 1 inch to the left, then it makes sense to move that center section 1 inch to the left because your drive shaft's going to be a little bit more in line. What's your opinion, Chad?
Yeah, I'm more of a fan of the center just because it moves the panel bar to the left also, which,
Sure.
I feel makes the car tight initially on entry. Some people say it makes it loose. I don't know. Anytime the rear roll center's to the left of the front roll center, I feel like you got to turn it harder to get it in the corner, but mixed opinions there. I'd stick with the centered if I was building the car.
That's how I would build it. All of our stuff is centered. Bradford, love the content. Enjoy comparing your real world experience to my vehicle dynamics class notes. On an IMCA street stock, what is a realistic weight percentage that still stays within the minimum weight? Well, where the motor's located in them things, you almost got to make the car. I mean, when you build the car, you really got to shave every ounce of weight you can shave off the front of that thing so that you can put weight in the back of it. But 54%, 56%, pretty good numbers with that street stock class. That seems to work pretty decent. You get over that, that tire's not, it's a street stock type tire, and it's I'm afraid it might make the car too directional and might not make the car rotate well in the middle of the corner. Okay. Alan wants to know, how many races should you get out of an Ibac 125 preloaded on an IMCA stock car? Well, you're running a 125-pound spring on a 2,900-pound stock car. No matter what the brand is, in my opinion, when we go to these lighter springs, performance-wise, 10, 12 nights is going to start pushing it. Just because when you've got a lot of preload in that spring, and it's not that the spring doesn't handle it, it's the way the rear end twists and actually twists the spring. So what's happening is you're actually asking that spring to do up and down motion as it's all coil one way or the other, and the spring is moving back and forth, and it's changing load side to side, and that's actually what hurts those springs the most. And like I said, all those springs, doesn't matter in my opinion when they're in that extreme condition. It's just asking a lot out of that spring for that weight spring. Braden, what would be your top 5 list of items to have to be right to achieve a successful race program? Examples, tire available. Oh boy. Well, top 5 items that you'd like to have. Well, damn good motor. That's number one. Really good race car. That'd be number two. Um, tires are tires are a big deal. You got to have fresh rubber on these things. Now, with the IMCA and some of the other sanctioning bodies, you can groove these and you can get a couple more nights out of them. But the way these tires are designed anymore, and it's not necessarily the tires' fault completely, but I mean the racetracks have been, kind of dry and crummy, and I kind of had to laugh because up to Deer Creek and they sheepsfoot their racetrack, so it's nice and hard. Well, I decided to take my 6-year-old granddaughter on the golf cart out there on the sheepsfooted racetrack the other night at Deer Creek. Well, her first comment was, "Grandpa, what are we doing out here?" And of course, as I'm trying to hang on to the steering wheel because these little tires catching every one of these little grips, I'm like, I really don't know what we're doing out here. I think we're giving you a ride. And we came around where they pull off the racetrack. She says, "Can we go off the track here?" "Yep, we can." Up the racetrack. So needless to say, tires and shock absorbers are a big key. An excellent shock program is definitely a major factor of the race car itself. And your maintenance program. I mean, once again, notes, go to a school, learn what you can from experienced people and develop your set of notebooks and your data so that you can have your own notebook to follow through, because your notebook is going to tell you, what I did at this racetrack 6 weeks ago, if I, or whatever the case was, like up to Deer Creek the other night, Jake McBurney had his notes from last year there, and they made some changes to what they did for his heat race. And of course, he ended up doing well in his heat race. So those would be the kind of things that I would suggest. Okay, Bruce, have you guys ever tried floating down or canoeing down the Iowa River while at Boone? Trust me, while we're at Boone, there's not enough time to go do that in extracurricular activities, because we're there from about 8:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm not there at 8 o'clock in the morning, but my son's usually there by 8 o'clock in the morning, and we probably leave there midnight at night or in that neighborhood. So it sounds like it would be a fun time. Jared, USRA B-Mod Type 3-link suspension. Your opinion on right rear shock and front valving? Well, it depends on what your situation is with that B-Mod. You got to be a little careful not to get too aggressive on rebound, because if you get too aggressive on rebound, you're going to take horsepower away from it. So our two shocks that we normally run is a straight 4.4 for a heavy top, heavy type condition, or a racetrack that's got grip, fast place. 3.5 is pretty much the normal what we use for the valving for the slicker conditions. A little softer, gets the car in because you're going in a little slower, gets the car rotated on the right rear a little bit, rolled over on the right rear a little better. And then it keeps it there just a little bit longer so that it slows down the action, getting angle in that right rear trailing arm just to kind of help you get traction up off. Jeff, what's your thoughts on spring behind shock in front connected to the rear end housing? Seems to be a new thing around here. Spring is behind, but the shock is connected to the rear end. Well, 2012, that's the setup that we used with Jeff Taylor to win the Super Nationals with. Worked really well. It's got a little more traction. It doesn't help you get in as good, but it's definitely, I feel it's got more traction up off the corner. In fact, with Jeff's in that situation, that particular year, Uh, my suggestions was to him where he was at. He had to maintain the first 20 laps because the car was going to be a little snug. By lap 30, the car was going to start getting free, and by lap 30, and that last 10 laps is when the car was going to come to him, and that's when he needed to be making his deal. And I think he took the lead on lap 38. So it worked out well. I've used that in many different situations, and it's kind of a driver preference, but there is some traction there. You mentioned using wheel spacers to increase side bite, running a 4-off right rear with a 1-inch wheel spacer. What's your thoughts of going to the half-inch? And that's what we do with that. Well, you're basically running a 3-inch wheel because you're running a 4-inch offset with a 1-inch spacer. So you would be actually going to like a 3.5-inch wheel if you went with the spacer. I think that's a good plan, Dan. I think that's exactly what I would do, because a lot of times what we'll do with the modifieds is we'll run our sport mods, we run a 3-inch wheel and we can't run the wheel spacers. But our modifieds, we run a 3-inch wheel and we qualify a lot of times with a 1/2-inch wheel spacer and take the 1/2-inch wheel spacer off. So we have a straight 3 up for the feature. Don, IMCA modified, will going longer on the upper bar in the rear help forward traction or cause more issues than it's worth? I think it would cause more issues than it's worth. I've not had great success going longer.
You can't just do one without doing the other. Anytime you increase the top one, it slows it down so much that you can't drive in the corner. So is it going to give you traction? Well, yeah, it's going to give you traction. It's going to make the car really tight. So it's such a balancing act there. I know what you're trying to do there. You're trying to get grip, but anytime you put a longer bar there, most of the time when you're putting longer bars there, you're trying to slow the motion. You're on a rough track. You're trying to delay that roll steer because you're trying to get a whole bunch of chains. So I'm not a fan of a huge bar split. So if let's say you're running a 15-17 and you went to a 15-18, that's, in my opinion, that's just going to slow that down and make the car really too tight. I mean, you have to get in the corner, and anything you do for traction, if you can't turn, you're never going to have traction because you're going to be you're going to have to turn too much to get it to rotate. So I'm not a fan of that.
Sean, should you be running an OEM brake pad on the right front of an IMCA Sport mod? Absolutely not. No. What happens with the OEM pad is keep in mind they're designed to help slow your station wagon down, and they don't have a whole lot of heat. Well, all of a sudden now you're running something that's you're going to be using the brakes quite a bit, and it's going to create heat. Well, the heat temperature of the rest of your brake pads come in at a whole different temperature. And what happens with that OEM pad, it's made to run cool. And once it gets warm, it actually does the opposite of what you want it to do. It'll actually start gripping that wheel and actually make it feel like you had an aggressive pad on the right front. The problem is you just don't know when it's going to come in and go out, because it's just the heat range difference. You definitely, I always recommend we run AFCO or the Willwood pads, and we run their softest pad that we can on the right front, medium pad on the left front, and then the 2 aggressive pads on the right rear and the left rear. Some guys run the aggressive left front. Guys that like to run their car a little bit tighter, that seems to help pretty decent. I don't know if I like that much split on the front end, because I think it can get the car turned to the left a little bit more, like if you really have to get on the binders for an accident or whatever. But I would not recommend an OEM pad. Bill, 19 GRT by BHE, 525-pound left front, 575-pound right front, 175 left rear, 225 right rear, 85 pounds of bike. Can't keep it off the right rear and carrying the left front. Rear end's too far to the left. You got too much J bar or too much Panhard bar in it. If you're carrying the left front tire, that's a good indication that the rear end is located too far to the left, or you're running a 4-inch wheel or something like that, where that right rear tire is sucked in real hard. Dan, I've been lowering the right rear trailing arm to 5 degrees for the feature. What are your thoughts about leaving it at 5 degrees for the heat race and lowering it to 3 to 4 for the feature? Well, you got to be a little careful on these racetracks, because what happens is, and we'll take Deer Creek as an example, even with Deer Creek being really dry, slick, you've really got to rotate the corner quite a bit. So if you take too much angle out of that right rear trailing arm, it can actually cause the car to have a split second tightness in the middle of the corner. Well, when it gets that split second tightness in the middle of the corner, the driver's gonna not like that, so he's gonna gas it up. Well, if you're on a slick racetrack and he gasses it up, what's gonna happen? We're gonna snap the tires loose, and what he's gonna tell you is his car's loose. He has no forward traction whatsoever. Well, it might have been the fact that he was a little too snug getting in, or a little too snug in the middle of the corner. That 3 to 4, I've done that on certain racetracks. If you're on a place that's got pretty good banking, where like Deer Creek is like as an example, the very bottom of the racetrack is pretty flat, and then it's kind of a concave. It's not a straight bank. It's
like a dish.
It's a progressive banking. And in that situation, if you went in on the bottom, the car would be too tight. So I'd try it, but once again, if it gets to the point where your driver feels that he's a little too free getting in, or a little bit too tight in the middle, that's going to be the problem. You'd be better off putting more lead in the car to help him get up off the corner and keep the angle, rather than taking the angle away from it. Sean, might check your rear end from left to right. I agree. We had problems, still kind of do, but moving the rear end over to the left or spacing the right rear out more can play with the left front, and it's chained up too. So yeah, it's definitely, if that rear end is just a little bit too much to the left, the thing gets so much side bite that right rear tire.
Intruder?
Yeah. He evidently must have seen somebody. He'll get over it. Anyway, I agree with that. That can play a big role in things. Chad bought 4 of your rear's outside weight jack cups, set up UPS last week. Great product. Only bought bearing setup for the left front. Any advantages of having them all 4 on all 4?
Yeah, as long as your springs are in tension, so the OD grab with the Torrington bearing is a huge advantage to the spring life. The guy earlier was talking about the life of that 125. If that 125 is on a Torrington bearing, it might double the life of that spring, just because as it's going through its motion and doing its spring twist, if the cup doesn't move, it creates friction, and that's what changes the rate and what fatigues that spring and why it loses free height. So having the bearing there is key to having a spring work properly, but also extending the life of it. But you can only run that Torrington bearing if you stay in tension. So like the right rear, a couple weeks ago, we had a guy that had an issue with the right rear climbing, and then it would come loose, and when it slammed back down, it would wreck that bearing. So you have to stay in tension. If you have limit chains on the left front and the right rear to keep it in tension and keep that spring bearing lined up through motion, then I would run them on all 4 corners for sure.
Let's see. Adjustments for more instant drive. Spring pull bar, 3-link Pro Stock. Instant drive. Well, that's a good question.
Instance and more angle, shorter.
Yeah, a shorter bar, more angle would give you more instant drive. A little bit more rear percentage might not hurt, depending on, of course, how much you are already. You wouldn't want to go too heavily on the rear. For instant drive, that's about what I can tell you there. Bryce, a brake pad from the parts store and a very inconsistent as it heats up. I agree with you, Bryce. That's exactly what we talked about. Well, Jeff Taylor doesn't want us to give away his secrets that he ran back in 2012. Well, come on, Jeff. We got to share the goodies with everybody.
Speaking of secrets, he said he was cooking before the show when he texted me. Come on. Really?
And it's just kind of like the torque arms. We ran torque arms back in 1994. So, I mean, it's like it's not new technology. It kind of goes in cycles, and they both have their advantages and they both have their disadvantages. And it's a driver deal. Once again, driver friendly. A good old torque arm car is a very, very driver friendly car. Might not have the instant traction, but doing that shock and spring behind the housing definitely will help that out in that situation. So it's good to know our old buddy JT's watching our show there. Yeah, and we even got famous people watching this. Holy cow.
Looks like both Taylors are watching.
Yeah, there we go. Well, Peyton too. Holy moly. Well, at least we got the Taylor family. We know what those guys are doing tonight. Sean, move your end over to the right and you'll help that problem. I agree. You get the rear end too far to the left, and it's going to tote that left front like no other. I mean, it's just the way it goes. Don, zero index left rear. We lost Chad. Zero index left rear is at ride height. The bird cage is at zero index. Or do you adjust at droop your zero index? I adjust the zero index at droop, and we actually index it. Ours is not zero. We actually index into the. Yep, I can hear you. There you go.
Not sure what happened.
Anyway, Don's got a question here. Zero index left rear is at the wide height of the bird cage is at zero index, or is it adjusted at droop to zero index? And I started to answer with the zero indexing at droop, and we actually index it into the spring about 3 degrees from there. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's whoever named it wrong. It should have nothing to do with zero index because it isn't like it's zero index. You know, what it does, it should be called compliance because it takes the bar lock out of the car. But anyway, you're going to set the cage up just like you would normally do at ride height, 3 degrees into the spring, just like Bob said. So when you put an angle finder on the shock plate, bottom top on our stuff, you can put a angle finder on there and see what your index is. And then as the car hikes and the cage indexes, it still indexes into the spring and builds traction through index. So the zero index should have been named differently. But what it was is that when the car is at full droop, it's at 6 and 12 instead of cammed over and like 11 and 5 or something like that. So, you know, it meaning that the bars are straight up and down, but the cage is still indexed. So I think was the theory on the naming of it. But in my opinion, it should be called, you know, left rear compliance or something, or no bar lock, or should have came out with a different name there. But I just followed on that deal.
Cody's got a question. IMCA modified crate. What is too short of a pull bar? I would think anything under 24 inches is too short. I still like something in the neighborhood of the 28-inch range, 28 to 30-inch range. I think that works pretty good. Dumb question. If you run zero index, can you still add good amount of indexing, or does that defeat the purpose?
Well, I think I just said that again. We probably need to do a tech video on this, but it just means that the cage is still going to index. So as you go through the motion and you set the cage at 3 degrees at ride height, as the car hikes, the cage, the suspension still indexes like it normally would, 15 to 20 degrees depending on how you have your bar angles set. So you're definitely going to increasing index then. That static ride height, like if you go from 3 to 5, is going to make everything happen quicker. It's going to get you into the corner quicker. It's going to build the traction quicker, but it could also cam over then. So you're kind of a balancing act, but that's when you zero index is, offsetting the rods so that you don't cam over, so that then essentially you can put more index into the car and more drive angle to get the traction. So, definitely tunability. We get a lot of questions about the zero index, and, I would run it all the time. I think you're still running it all the time, aren't you, Bob? I mean, that's,
Yeah.
it puts, like I said, it puts compliance in the suspension. And, if guys do it, we've had guys put it on and then they're like, well, that was garbage, well, that's fine. I mean, that's like saying you put a 6.4 shock on when you had a 4.6 on there. It ain't the same. You got to rebalance the race car, and you went back to the top 5 things, of what to have right. You have to mentally commit to something if you're going to rebalance the car and believe in it. So the zero index is definitely a commitment for sure.
Aaron's got a question. IMCA Sport Mod needing side bite in the corner when the track is slick. I can't shorten my panhard bar anymore. If I move the panhard bar down on the rear end, then it just dumbs the right rear. What would you recommend? Well, one of the things that kind of gets confusing is more than likely sometimes side bite can be confused with lack of forward traction, because side bite's definitely more of a factor corner entry. But by the middle of the corner, you should be back on the power to the point where now all of a sudden your traction should be pulling the car up underneath you. More than likely, you might actually be to the point where you might have the rear end move so far to the left that you're overworking the car to the point where it's like putting a 4-inch wheel over there, that you've got the car so tight getting in that then when you throttle it up, it tries to snap it loose. So in my opinion, I still believe in lead in those cars, running that left rear or that right rear bar up higher in the cage and trying to get more traction, forward traction with the car, throttling up, because most of the time from the center of the corner off, if you feel like you're lacking side bite, you're actually lacking forward bite. One more question regarding preload in the left rear. I feel it's sometimes inconsistent. Are most guys still playing with the preload or running a traditional left rear spring, like say a 200, 225? Well, once again, that's another driver preference. We've got some guys out there that are pretty strong with a 175 left rear and a 225 right rear. We've got some guys that are playing with that soft left rear spring, and they've got it figured out to the point where they're pretty good too. But I will agree with you. I think their consistency isn't as good, because there'll be one night, man, I tell you what, they're light years. I mean, it's just super, super fast. Super fast combination of a little short track like at Stewart. That combination works very well, that soft left rear spring there, because you're on a lot shorter racetrack. but on a big momentum type stuff, I think it's a disadvantage. I think the consistency of that 175 is still better. But it's once again, it's a driver preference. You got to definitely keep the car up. You got to really keep the car up on the trailing arm to keep it moving, to keep the angle in the trailing arm, because that's where your traction is anyway. Because once you're in the corner and you're on the throttle, the left rear spring doesn't have a lot of load on it to begin with. It's all on that left rear trailing arm. The problem that we run into is it's a little harder to drive, so you've got to do a lot better job of trail braking with that soft spring, because if you get off the throttle, it will fall, and it makes the car very inconsistent to drive. So the guys that are super good with the trail braking are pretty decent, but once again, you hit the nail on the head on the inconsistent thing, because I've seen them be inconsistent. Depending on certain racetracks, they're spot on. Certain racetracks, they're a B feature car. Cody, okay, I'm at 20 at full droop. Been thinking I was doing too much. Thanks, best thing on the internet, weekly videos. 20 is quite a bit. Yeah, I mean, we don't go over 19 most generally, but once again, give your car what it likes and what you like. Jeff, speaking of angles, do you guys calibrate your angle finders in a level spot in the shop and then set the button of the chassis to 0 degrees to measure everything recommended angle from there?
No, your angles are all referenced to the world, not to the rake of the car. So he's saying, would you zero the gauge on the chassis rail and take your angles based on the rake in the car? And no, I don't think so. You don't, do you?
Nope.
You're level, you square, you
We're
level
square
the
with
level on the world, on the floor,
Yep.
and then all the angles are based off of the relative world, not the, if the car has rake pre-yaw or whatever towards the right front, that's out of the equation. We want to know what the trailing arms are, and everything is at ride height statically in, ready to rock and roll. We don't care what the rake is. I mean, we do, but not when we're checking them angles. Sorry.
Right. Tim, how much left rear bite would you run on a 3-link car? I always go in that 80 or 65 to 85 pounds of bite with a 54% left side car. Now, depending on what your left side weight is, if your left side weight is 55%, then you're going to need to be in that 85, 90 pound range. But for a standard 54% left side, somewhere between 65 and 85 pounds on a 3-link car, I think is a very good combination. That still gives you pretty good load on that left rear, but it doesn't get the car too out of balance getting in. Advantages, disadvantage of a short J-bar or a longer? Go for it.
Short track, short J-bar, long track, long J-bar. Shorter bar is going to turn better. Longer bar is going to be tighter.
Yeah, it's just like everything. The longer bar is going to react a little slower. The short bar is going to react a little bit quicker. So just, keep that in mind. But like Chad just said, it'll do exactly what he just said you said to do. Well, I don't know what that dog's seeing today. Chad, do you make a billet ink pen?
I don't, but I have one. Believe the company is called Karas, Karas. They make billet aluminum anodized pens, and that's what I do. You just change out the centering cartridge. So, pretty badass pen, made in Arizona.
Jeff Schroyer, how much bite would you run on an A-mod? I still stay at 54% left side car. I still stay in that 65 to 85 pound range. That just seems to be a good balance point. We've had good luck with that in the past, and so we've been good. All right, last question. We are lacking off the corner in the slick on a 3-link. Well, the 3-link car, depending on, if you're running with soda, you got to stay within that 5-degree angle. If you're running USRA or IMCA, you can run, we run static 28 degrees on the left rear trailing arm and in the neighborhood of 5 to 7 on the right rear trailing arm. That's going to definitely get you up there. That's going to help traction wise. That's pretty much about the UMP. No spoiler, probably. That's still going to be the same thing with that UMP tire. I run that kind of split, and then of course I run my chain so that I don't get over 3 inches of steer in the car, so that it doesn't get too loose in the middle. Rear percentage, it needs to be in that 56% range. So somewhere in that neighborhood would be a pretty good. Shock absorbers. Once again, that's a long question or long explanation, but talk to your shock builder about what he's got for you could depending on where you're racing at, that right rear shock, like I said, that 3-5 combination is good. We've got some guys that have actually run more rebound than that and like it, but it's a little bit fidgety on a rough type racetrack. Okay, well, we appreciate you guys. Great group of guys again tonight. We had a couple famous drivers from the same family on here, and our good buddy Pat was on here. So I mean, we had another great night. You guys all had some great questions, and hopefully you have good weekends coming up. Don't forget about that Harris Class shirt. We still have some of those available. Sure would like to see all of you wearing one of them. That'd be good. Super Nationals. Oh, yeah, that looked good. Super Nationals. So we will see everybody. And let's see here. The 22nd. Well, that'll be 2 weeks before Super Nationals. So we'll be really ready to go. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and we appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.